for 6 years. Recently, I developed a site for a regional newspaper called the New York Observer. They're a city newspaper for New York City. And I did a write-up on Drupal.org. You can take a look at it if you haven't already. It's drupal.org/NYobserver. And I think it's one of the leading examples of a paper using Drupal, in the 2007 era of Drupal. So I did that along with a partner, Barry Jasper, who's here too.
Most has just recently taken the title of sexiest news website away from us. We held it for a year, so it's gone now. One of the interesting things, and I'll throw to Steve in a second, even many of the sites that I have up here on the screen don't use what we would call the Web 2.0 features. One of the things I think is really important, and this one does actually, and I can say that on this site, that's U.S. pop culture garbage. It's great. It's awesome. And it's got receipts. So simple things like reporter bylines, hooks to profiles. Does the Observer do it?
Yeah, we do. We have, well, it's not what Drupal necessarily calls a profile, but there is a page for all their columnists that talks about them and then lists all the articles they wrote.
Yeah,
so we did do that.
In many cases, they don't, and it's because the journalists, they don't want their shine. I had a journalist once tell me they didn't want their picture on the internet, and I tried to argue that you're fighting for audience against TV, where people are in their living room every night, right? So you have to get your face out, but that's just so. I think we're doing some very interesting things with Drupal, but in most cases we are still very much tied to the news organizations behind us. There are two very notable exceptions on this panel who would argue that that's their strength. Right? They're not tied to the legacy business model. That said, Steve probably knows more about the legacy business model than the rest of us, so I will toss to him to say something smart.
Ken and I are basically paid by the newspaper industry, and the thing you need to understand about newspapers is that they've been losing readership in a linear fashion every year since 1970. And that's American data, and it's a little different in other markets around the world. But the reasons are rapidly moving around the planet and manifesting themselves in other places. Let me kind of explain what I mean by that. When I grew up, we had 3 television networks. We now have about 500 channels on DirecTV. And in other markets around, I was in Sweden last year, and I think that they've gone from 1 or 2 channels to 8 or 9 very, very quickly. What happens is all this stuff competes for time and attention, and the readers go away. But when the readers go away, then the underlying business model becomes imperil because it's a mass model. What we're trying to do with using tools like Drupal is to pull people back into a relationship with the institution, rather than having the website reflect the newspaper, or having the newspaper reflect the community by having the community on the website. So we're trying to rebuild a relationship with the people in the audience, and people we used to call the audience, have them in a conversational relationship with one another and the newspaper. So for that reason, we've been interested in Drupal primarily for its ability to support community blogging, profiles, the buddy list functionality, the guest book, things like that.
You want to take us in a different direction?
Sure. I mean, I think that now Public exists, and our business model is based on the weakness of the news industry. I wouldn't say that it's dead, but it's certainly on its way. I think that there will always be a place for big brands, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. I think there's always a place for journalists. I know that now Public has a lot of criticism to say attitude of journalism. I would say that our goal is to fill in a gap. The newspaper industry doesn't have a relationship with readers. Communication, like most TV stations, is in one way. And what public leverage is knowledge of building communities, of empowering people. And our goal is to turn the entire industry on its head. That there isn't an editor sitting in a room deciding what the top story of the day should be. It's algorithms and formulas of people, so that you look at things based on popularity or based on moderation and flagging. So our goal is to put the entire, it's a crowdsourced model, it's very much like with the media. So our goal is to basically put the entire control from writing, editing, moderation, distribution into the hands of people like you, and pay you for the content that you submit, distribute it out to media organizations. We really want to turn every aspect of the industry on its head, and basically hopefully leverage the fact that people do want that relationship, they do want to interact, they do want to have their say.
Right, so you're taking the online news model out of Korea. People are familiar with online news. It's sort of the godfather of this kind of crowd media. You're different in many ways.
Online news is sort of like a hybrid between our two models in the sense that they work, in order to contribute to online news, you need to sign up with your passport, you need to get writing samples, you need to go through a high degree of vetting. If it's now public, you need to create an account. So they're very particular on who can publish. Once you do publish it, they have staff. Last time I heard 80 or 90 people that do fact-checking, editing, rewriting, and revision. They choose whether or not they're going to publish your content. So it's similar in the fact that it's driven by their community and it's written by individuals. It's different in the sense that they also don't pay their contributors directly. There's jars on their site where people can earn money for contributions. They may not have revenue share for a while, but I looked at their site. But they're much more of a hybrid model where I don't know if it's a pro-am or they believe in oversight and holding autonomy. We believe that empowering the individual.
Their journalism model is actually very conventional. What they've done is unusual is to outsource the reporting to an army of freelancers, but they're still playing the journalist role in the process. Their business model, if it works at all, is probably the thing that is more radical. What is your business model? How do you make money?
I'll come to that in a second. I think you put up a really interesting word that we use, journalism. A lot of times, people use the term citizen journalism to refer to this industry that's starting to establish. I think that it's a really bad term.
We're in violent agreement.
We never use it on our site. Journalist implies certain roles and responsibility in the world, and I strongly believe that there is a need for better journalism. And I think that one of the reasons that we've been so successful is that there isn't enough good journalism. But our goal is more, I would say, eyewitness reporting is a better way of phrasing what people do in that public. People report on events that they witness, news as it happens. So our goal is more to own the breaking news, individuals telling their stories. So that when the GAO report came about with hundreds of thousands of weapons missing in Iraq, the first thing I thought was, oh my gosh, another problem in already fucked up war. And we had a member who used to be a soldier in the supply chain who wrote a really interesting article about the transition of troops and the time frame and how the likelihood of most of those weapons going where they went happened. It's just that documentation is poor, etc. So it gives you a really interesting. So it's more about first-hand accounts, personal information, and eyewitness raw breaking news. It's not about journalism. It's not about packaging information, and that should be done by professionals.
I was going to say, Damien, how do you?
We are on the same hybrid model with about one-third of the views which are published on the web are from the community, from the internet, from the website. But still, the journalists have some editing and also verification of information, which is a very, I think, important duty of the journalist. And also, another role where journalists can play a role is finding the people who can contribute, but not maybe naturally. We have quite a good example of we had a strong strike in the south of France about 2 months ago from cellular phone companies. There was a hotline, people where the hotline department was sold to another company. And we managed to find one of the participants in this strike. She was not an internet people person, and she didn't have the blog, and she didn't have the idea to publish it. The role of journalists has been to find this person and to ask them, do you want to publish a blog and look at one, and do you want to say something? Then twice a week she sent us some text contribution that were reworded and then published on the website. And this is where journalists can have a really added value to more community on the website.
Yeah, that's actually an issue I've raised at other conferences. One of the problems that I have with citizen journalism or crowdsourced journalism or contributed information is still the people who have access to the tools, both from a financial standpoint and from an education standpoint, creates some real problems for me philosophically. And I think one of the things that we need to do better as an industry, and Drupal actually really allows for this, is to be able to reach out into the lesser served parts of the community. My wife works in a very dangerous, very low-income neighborhood doing charity work. Her people need to be telling their stories about how city decisions affect their lives, but they have no channel to do it. And even the nice tools that we build, right, they don't have access to them, and even they wouldn't know what to do with them. So I really like this hybrid concept. I am going to ask the two gentlemen on the end, the models with the folks you're working with, is it what we derogatorily call shovelware, where you're taking stuff from the print edition, shoveling it online without changing anything, or is it a different model or a hybrid?
The New York Observer is a little bit more advanced than shovelware, I think, but I think it's nowhere near the Mike Myers now public model. They have a newspaper, a weekly newspaper that prints every Wednesday. As of now, they changed the stories on the main website primarily on Wednesdays to match the newspaper. I think they do a little bit of publishing during the week.
They do. I caught the Alberto Gonzalez resignation on the New York Observer accidentally. I went to look at it.
Yeah.
They do some live publishing.
They do.
We have trouble getting our people to do.
Yeah. They do some, and the website does a lot of Web 2.0 things. They are very big on RSS feeds, very big on tag clouds, but the extent of user contribution is really common. And I think that there's a notion that users could do more on the website, but there isn't a widespread notion at that organization that users should do a lot more. I think there is we are the editors, we are the authors. That's how it should be kind of model.
How many people here are subscribed to newspapers, printed newspapers? 5 years ago?
Yeah.
I dropped out when, I know a bit about TCP, I'm a network engineer by heart, I know a bit. And when they wrote around 1995 stories, I was completely against it. I knew it was the internet were different than the journalist said. And then I thought, if I can't trust them, how TCP/IP works, and they're just making bullshit stories about it, how can I trust them on Iraq, on social, and all kinds of stuff. So that's when I dropped out. And that's when I started in news groups, nowadays, NMTP or Usenet, whatever, and blog straight a lot later. But most traditional newspapers, in my humble opinion, are still in the shovelware. We have, actually, they're sitting behind the Pytex machines, and then they publish it, and then you have to go to an editorial staff who enriches it with taxonomy, and it's still so too. I mean, on Friday, my chief editor went to home, and he he saw that there was a building on fire. It was on Saturday. And he knew that it wouldn't be online before Monday. It took him a whole weekend to describe that because the publishers only do it on Sunday night, and then the thing is printed, and then it's online as well. So for me, I'm not into traditional media personally. I think it's a dying business model, and I hope to see. I saw the last Fox Facts, I saw the last State of Fox. I hope to see one day hold in my hand the latest newspaper in the Netherlands. I'm working on that. I don't know if you know IRES, that kind of technology, digital paper. It's an offspring of Philips, a Dutch. It's a digital paper. It's a complete paper. You can fold it. You can turn pages with stuff. I hope to carry that in my pocket in 5 years, and not a printed dead tree. That's useless.
It's worth noting that one of the reasons why newspapers were so incredibly popular, and still are on things like the metro system, is because they're very, very portable, right? But how many people in this room have a portable device that will let you read news? I do, actually, but I'm bad. You have, the iPhone, or a Sidekick, or even a WAP-enabled mobile phone. Your options for getting the same information have exploded so much that it's very, very difficult. I mean, we are, in an attempt to sort of resurrect the newspaper, we're looking at SMS products, and we're looking at wireless, WAP products.
Isn't that the one area that's been wrong to that, though, is the Metro 24-hour dailies that people get on there?
In the general newspaper industry, I think that's the case. The Metros are phenomenally successful. 20 Minutos here in Spain is really successful. Because
in terms of growth they are, in terms of margin, they're...
Well, there's a great book, if you're really, really interested in this topic. Again, it's about the American newspaper industry. It does apply to Europe as well, called The Vanishing Newspaper by Philip Myers, who just retired from the University of North Carolina. And he talks about this kind of change in the decline of why newspapers don't reach the audience that they used to, and profit margins is a central part of his argument. Here's the basic argument, and if you actually go to my blog is named Second Goose after his argument. The Philip Myers Goose that lays the golden eggs argument is this: you're a newspaper company, you own a printing press, you are used to making a profit. Now, this is important. A profit somewhere between 25 and 35% per year. Now, to put some contrast on that, supermarkets profit about 1% per year. It's a very narrow margin business. Newspapers traditionally, at least in the U.S., have had very high profit margins. There's a guy named Philip Anschutz who owns the San Francisco Examiner and the Examiner brand in about 40 other American cities, who's banking on a 6% profit margin. A lot of the weekly newspapers that you get, like the New York Observer, probably have built in a 6 or 7% profit margin. A 6 or 7% profit margin is great if your business model is 6 or 7%. But if you're a big newspaper company and you're being publicly traded and your stockholders are expecting to hit 30%, you can't hit 6%. It won't do any good. So the thing about the goose, if you have the goose that lays the golden egg, well, the egg's not worth as much as it used to be. Well, that sucks for you, because you bought a goose that was going to lay, an egg every day. Well, it only lays one egg a week now, right? Well, great time to buy that goose. Great time to buy that goose if you can support it. So it's not that the industry or even the service is failing. It's that the business model supporting it, and the advertising model supporting it. And you see things like Times Select, the New York Times, the paid online service, they killed it yesterday. They absolutely killed it. And they killed it because they can make more money by putting Google ads on their free page. So, yeah.
And Ken, when you were talking about 36 and 1%, were you mixing gross and net?
No. I don't remember the difference between, I'm talking net.
Those percentages that Ken's referring to are operating margins, usually before amortization, depreciation, interest, that kind of thing. But yeah, in the U.S., The margins have typically been high. In some other Scandinavian countries, I know they're typically closer to 6 or 7% operating margins. But the trap you get into is that you borrowed money from the stock market with that margin basically as the expectation. If you miss the margin, you get beat up. And it's very likely that a lot of the existing institutions that do journalism are going to go crashing down hard and be replaced by new players. I fully expect that. There's another really big force that's at work here that we haven't talked about, and that is the Internet's ability to erase distance. And suddenly, there are 1,400, between 14 and 1,500 newspapers in the United States. If they're all in the same market doing the same thing, it's not going to work because people can only remember 3 or 4 brands, right? Newspapers exist the way they exist today because of geography and distance. The Internet's collapsing on it. The Guardian is 1 click away. The BBC is 1 click away. So we've had to come to grips with this reality, and we are now looking at our newspapers becoming more and more and more local. So we actually don't feel threatened by this guy here because he's not local. He's definitely global in terms of what he's going at. Now, if we were doing this in Augusta, Georgia, then we'd be worse.
He does have some users, I guess.
We have 150,000 users in 4,000 cities in 2 countries. So while our approach at the current time is more of a shop and global approach, it's because you can't build a global business locally. And our goal is hyper-local.
You can still hang on.
We're definitely going after your lunch.
So, do you want to talk about your business model at all?
Sure. I mean, the question earlier. Like any traditional media company, we're going to derive a lot of our revenue from advertising. What interests us more, though, are the non-traditional, revenue streams we create. We envision ourselves much more as the next generation of Reuters than, say, a traditional newspaper chain. So, we're much more interested in how we can create the world's largest army of reporters and be able to geolocate and immediately dispatch people so that there's an event happening that you can locate a number of 5-star reporters at DrupalCon so that you can negotiate over the phone with them that they're going to provide you with certain specific set coverage, and then there's revenue for the person providing the material, there's content that people are interested in, and that's a really interesting technology platform and solution which has further reaching ideas and goals, which is I have a house in Florida that's a hurricane season. I can't get on a plane because all the plane grounded. Is my house still there? I pay $500 to know right now. So there's really interesting uses of this technology platform outside of news. We sort of see news as the beginning of what could be a much larger services organization. And once you have people everywhere, you can instantly communicate. Technology is only getting better. So there are cell phones that can stream video. And so as you can stream high-quality video 3 years from now on a great data network, you don't need to be Fox News or CNN to have a satellite shot to get the news. So it's really revolutionizing. I mean, it used to be you go to the local deli, I get up, go to the local deli, I pick up a newspaper, and that's it. And the internet was great because it was a little bit faster than the newspaper. But now it's going to be faster than TV. And I think, that's going to be really interesting because, that's what, CNN put a real rating on the news industry. One of the things that bothers me about the news industry, and I think one of the huge opportunities that we have, is that there's a growing dissatisfaction with the job that they do. I wish that there were more people like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I wish there was more insightful, interesting reporting, investigative journalism. I wish people didn't act as a megaphone. This is personal, this is necessary. Now public. But I'm very dissatisfied with the news industry, and I think that a lot of people are. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for individuals to come in and, even if it's opinion, editorial, I think that people want facts, head of the store, but it's the access to more people, more information. The downside is the onus is on you as the reader, and we tend to sort through, and we tend to be lazy, and we tend to like skim in, and and so it's, on one hand we're saying, oh man, I wish I got better information from Fox News, and then I'm saying, well, I'm not really going to read 3 6 blogs to find out the truth.
Now, I'm interested in moving the conversation in a slightly different direction. The segue I was going to make is, I can't remember the name of the site. There's a website in Vancouver that doesn't run Drupal. What they do is local news reporting, and their hook is they tell you who the reporter is. They outsource the reporting to contractors and non-professionals. And the one story that I remember, they sent 2 ex-prostitutes to cover the trial of a man who was under suspicion of murdering 6 sex workers.
No, it's the largest murder trial in history of Canada.
Yeah, huge murder trial, but they found 2 self-professed ex-prostitutes who covered this trial because they wanted you to know that this was the perspective they were going to bring to the story, and that was how they were going to differentiate their coverage from everyone else. And I just thought that was just mind-blowingly cool. And the point I want to make about that is technologies like Drupal that are free, that are open, that are fast to deploy. We heard, I think, Bert and Steve and I talk about why we use Drupal. We want to push these traditional news organizations to move faster. That's why we started doing it. The first Drupal site we built in 6 weeks with a staff of 1.5, maybe 2.5, right? So the question for the panel, and we'll start at the other end this time, is why is Drupal a good platform for doing experimental news development or serving the kind of information needs that people have? And then this will also be a good time to just throw out general questions.
It's the usual Drupal advantages. There's all the latest cool web stuff is ready for you to build. All the Lego blocks are there. So you get your RSS and your profiles and your in your email coming in, your email going out, and just about all sorts of interaction with your end users is built in right there, and permissions and authentication. So it's terrific for high, fast-paced news publishing.
Yeah, I was at the last DrupalCon when Dokri was showing off his Asterisk integration, which is voice-to-blog software.
Yeah.
That he was going to deploy it now publicly.
We have a lot of, you can't have a successful citizen reporting agency without having a mobile device. So you think about the first thing that people do with their phone, they make phone calls. The second thing they do is text messaging. And so while we want to have rich support for things like streaming video, all the edge cases, and video and photos, the easiest thing to do is say, we think of a report coming in from Beirut on CNN, it's a map with a member picture or a picture of the reporter, and a voiceover. That's the easiest thing to do with any mobile phone within your graph that doesn't require any technology.
But the point was, so he's showing off this Asterisk integration, which we either would have had to pay $250,000 for, or spend 2 years, I swear, researching and building, if we did it outside of the Drupal platform. So, are you running into those kind of things? To our European panels. Let me ask you this differently. Have they asked you to do anything crazy that you couldn't do?
No. It's the other way around. In fact, I think we're 3 years behind you because I just deployed my first Drupal site in 6 weeks in 1.5. The Dutch expression is 1 person and half a cow, and that was me. In 6 weeks, so that's but the point was, they're so 1.0, we added too many features. For example, they wanted both user-generated content and journalistic content. And Drupal is a great tool to do that. You have your RSS publishing for your normal stuff, and users can add. But we went overboard. We said, oh, you also want this feature, and you also want this feature. So we added, for example, CC licensing, for example. And we told the newspaper, this is great stuff, you shouldn't own their content, etc. It's not working out. The newspaper doesn't get it, their traditional readers don't get it. And so did we did they ask stuff we couldn't do? No, we did too much. And that's basically the problem with Drupal, which is rather agile and can do a lot of stuff.
We had that problem as well at Savannah. We threw too many features at it. We had a user rating system that I wrote where you could go in and say, oh, emoji is great, I give them a 10 out of 10. It would rank people. No one uses it because it's buried in the user interface because they thought it was a good idea, but then they didn't tell the designers it was important. You know, it's one of those guys.
It's really one of the greatest challenges I think we're going to face is user interface simplification.
Oh, yeah.
We have too much information, we have too many options, you have too much territory to cover. This is why I actually feel still fairly secure against the incursion of an institution like you, because as we discard wire services, national coverage, we can actually make our brand much easier to understand and easier to navigate.
What would your prediction be if you have richly that knowledge of the industry? Where you be? Is the newspaper industry going to thin out? You know, what's going to happen to television news? What do you think the next step is?
Well, right now, large metropolitan newspapers are all in trouble. Every single one of them.
What were the numbers we got last week? We got numbers at a meeting last week. It was like 3 major publicly traded companies in the U.S. were down 15%, 10%, 6% from last year in terms of sheer revenue, which that's huge. And of course that leads to cost cutting, which leads to staff cuts, which leads to, guess what? Worse reporting.
Worse reporting, and the newspapers that are going to fail are going to be the ones that are about large regions. They're going to go under, but the newspapers that are very focused on topics, geographically focused, be pretty strong for a long time. Television, I think, I was in a meeting last week with the journalism school dean from the University of Georgia, and he decided that he just written off the entire television industry. Stations are going away. Local stations, because you don't need local stations anymore. You've got satellite, and you've got internet, and yeah. What the local stations are doing on the internet with their websites is not going to help because they're dropping the ball.
The end result of this is that with smaller budgets is poor quality journalism, and that scares the crap out of me.
Well, that
I mean, the newspaper industry provides a very valuable service, and if it does die, we have a bigger problem than, you know, how do we fix that?
Well, you kind of like air. It's hard to build a business model around air, but if we didn't have it, we would really suck. And my fear is that we're kind of heading in that direction, the slow degradation of the quality to some point where we do something about it, but we're a long way.
But in the case of something like Brew Cup of Admit, right, you don't have the same kind of margin expectations. I mean, what's the business model there? You're trying to fulfill that traditional journalism watchdog role, aren't you?
Yeah.
Right? Which is not quite what you're doing. You're not really doing watchdog. You're doing, if I have enough information, it will be interesting to somebody, and that's valuable, and I can build a network on that. What you're doing is very traditional. It's just your delivery mechanism, and therefore your business, your cost structure.
Actually, the model is done on your part is based on the diving. And we are also using kyanos as a laboratory to experiment that, and thanks to Drupal it's easy to add new modules. There are a lot of risks there, and we are building an expertise on let's say, Drupal website for content production and community-based content production, hybrid model, things like that. And we are expecting to use this expertise for build website also newspaper marketing, but just the one for Little Observateur, which is the weekly newspaper in France, but of course the main one with community book review and critics, and we have also the contract with other newspapers. So we are trying to use look at 200 maybe as a wiki and laboratory to get the expertise and to show like to show
So you have a vision of franchising out, having other installations of the same thing. Has anyone done an installation profile model with another?
I have done it, you know, on my desktop, like, oh, these are cool, and not gone further than that, but
Yeah.
it's not hard.
Yeah. Well, on my watch, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I have an announcement, and then we'll open up for questions. The announcement is, if you're interested in a newspaper/news BLF, meet me in the hallway afterwards, we'll find a time, and we'll put it on the board probably for tomorrow. So if you're a news junkie, we're going to be talking at the BLF about doing a news install profile and some other common tasks that we need to accomplish. But unless anyone has something that they'd like to really say.
Actually, if I may add something, the flexibility of Drupal is very nice. And I'm working with journalists who are around 10 plus people who are all working together, are very creative. And so I explain how I just say, and this can be done with Drupal, which brings us to a kind of critical problem which is not specific to newspapers. How do we do from development to production? Because we will have a new version in October of the website, and so a lot of configuration is done in the database. And I know this is a very big debate. Actually, synchronizing the source is easy with the version CS, whatever. But for the database and develop collaborative development and bringing this production is still not solved. And for us, it's quite a big problem. I guess we are not the only ones who are.
Easy solution is don't use a development system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything is fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the exciting way to do it.
Yeah, but sometimes,
But that's a serious problem.
It is a serious problem. Actually, the missing member of our panel says he has solved that problem. But he's not here, so we won't
There's a
talk.
module called GASP, I think, which does that. Take your database and put it to pre-production and put it to production again. There is a module out there, I'm quite sure.
The talk following this one is all about issues like that affect business and other people.
We have questions from the audience, or things you'd like to hear about.
That's sort of a semi-Drupal, sort of news media question. But the one thing that I found is that there's the old paper model as one was sort of cognitively more suited to finding things, a general overview of things that you were not that interested in. So basically I'm on a page and I see Prime Minister Mali visiting Barcelona. And if I can scan that article and be better informed on that topic. So I find that I'm better informed on the internet about things I care about, but much worse informed about things I don't care that much about. Just purely because of the recognition of my reading. And I may have so the front page of the New York Times gives me that quick overview. But then when I wrote a particular article, I no longer have the other things that I would have in the New York Times article. I should maybe have the headline, but that requires me to click. And I don't care about the Prime Minister of Mali, so I'm not going to click on it. But if it had been on a page, I would have scanned it, maybe I would have even remembered his name or something like that, but now I don't. So, so that, I wonder if there is a way of adding that in somehow into the online model. It's not just a matter of being a convenient reader, but also about sort of allowing for the human recognition of the page.
That is one of the great challenges of translating the experience. But the debate is, should you translate that same experience? I mean, newspaper advertising works on that very premise that you're going to naturally scan the page and we will accidentally catch your interest by putting an attractive photo next to a blender and, oh, I'm going to buy a blender. That's the way advertising works. So I'm torn when you say that because on the internet, people tend to go straight for what they want. And if you put clutter in their way, they'll go somewhere else. So the busiest pages we have, like the New York Observer front page is a great example. Once you get through that front, it's straight to what you asked for. And you can do that with
There's also this phenomenon, though, where people are bypassing front.
Yeah.
And a lot of the traffic is actually coming in from Google.
Yeah. And the eye track research that we've seen, have you ever seen any eye track stuff? It's where they put goggles on your head and they measure where you look on a computer screen. the iTrack research, we said, basically said, nobody looks at the ancillary elements on page, they just look, I mean, they're very, very focused. I'll also say, of course, that my news habit is that I know much more about Jennifer Aniston than I do. Right? But I don't know as much about the Iraq War, which is just a comment on what's available.
I must say, I don't read paper news anymore, but it's something that I could find myself occasionally missing. I remember 10 years ago, I just knew much more about this stuff that I have no idea about now. And it's just, I wonder how it can be compensated for. It doesn't have to be the page layout, but somehow.
I think if you tune your RSS subscriptions well, and you become an RSS reader, a morning RSS reader, you can get lots of different flavors that you like. I don't think you quite get to what you're saying, which is the president of Mali. I mean, it's unlikely that we would subscribe to such a thing and see it, but I think that you can get flavor in your morning by having different kinds of feeds in there. And people are self-selecting. Already people are only getting the kinds of news they want in spades. I mean, isn't that what Fox News is all about? Is that people who like that point of view are attracted to it. That's the news they watch, and everyone, despite the internet was supposed to democratize and make us all understand each other. I mean, in my opinion, we're sort of all going to what we like, and we're not learning a whole lot from each other.
We have
In certain respects.
two more questions. There's one here in the middle, and then...
I work for a newspaper and just reworked the way the thing before the news goes to the newspaper, what the news agencies produce. And actually this is highly important for the work of journalists. So you got the output, the massive output of the news agencies, and we reworked that with RSS, so everything Reuters produces and DPA produces flows in at our journalists, at our editors, at RSS, and we gave them tools to work with RSS and to use those items. They arrive there and put them in a content management system and back on the home page. And as we implemented this process, this workflow, we saw that even in RSS there are still points to make better and to make it richer, but with RSS, the idea of what a news is changes and how to use it. And we tried in some parts to move that into Drupal to give our users not access to the news agency feed, but to work around with RSS feeds and with RSS items to do something with that. And I think this is the point Drupal was not that good at the moment.
The BBC has done some really interesting pieces with that. I actually think the future is in being able to build collaborative news building applications where I'll be able to go into it now public and grab these 3 photos and this chart and this story and put together my own narrative of what happened. In fact, I think I'm going to go write that down and put it in as a Knight Foundation grant. By the way, if you're interested in news and Drupal, the Knight Foundation in the U.S. gave out
$5 million.
They gave out $5 million. They had 3 Drupal projects this year and gave out about $40,000, I think. The deadline is October the 15th. Knight.org?
KNIGHT.org,
I believe. Just Knight Foundation. You'll find it. Yeah. One more question.
Okay, one question. We've heard a lot about the things that the online stuff is really good at. To me, it comes up with there's the speed thing, there's the geography thing, there's the diversity and the frontline directness stuff. But what do you feel is the stuff that your actually traditional newspapers are really better at, or whereas the online stuff isn't good at?
Investigative journalism.
But investigative journalism has nothing to do with the medium as principle.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. They currently seem to do more of it and better of it, maybe because they have better budgets.
I think that's it.
But I think that's whom we turn to do that, and that's why Mike would say, I'm scared. If these big news organizations go down, I think, who's going to do the investigation of, the attorney generals are getting fired and why they're getting fired and so forth?
Well, I think the model that works, and we've seen this in a couple of instances, is you'll have a user get on and say, I can't believe what just happened to me. And 3 other people come in and say, yeah, that happened to me too. And then the editor comes along and says, we're going to go make some calls, right? And we've had some cases where that has made it all the way to the state capitol. And the governor has said, oh, I will fix that for you, right? And then the readers rejoice.
Yeah.
So that kind of interactive process.
Again, it can start with a conversation.
It can. So the things that the newspaper does better, not as a physical object, but as a resource. Yeah, I mean, the trick is, and Bert spoke to this a little bit, and I know I can speak to it a lot, that guy who's really good at investigative reporting isn't comfortable yet breaking his story on the web. He wants to wait for the Sunday edition when he can get 300 columns, because that's the way he was trained to value his work.
If I can comment quickly, also a little bit of the leadership issue. I work with most of the printouts, people who newspapers are of the longer executive pieces. This is a matter of the problem of the theme versus the 5 days.
Yeah, I
think
we do need to clear out here, but I think you're right. I think it's hard to get people to read more than about 200 words of an online story. I think that's true. Thank you very much.